And we're going to continue with the 15th chapter of the second book of A Tale of Two Cities. The chapter is called Knitting. The book is called The Golden Thread. We are above Defarge's wine shop, and Defarge and three other men, each calling each other, or four other men, I should say, each calling one another Jacques, are listening to the story of one of them who saw the suspected killer of the Marquis being walked in chains to his inevitable execution. He imitated the action of a man's being impelled forward by the butt end of muskets. As they descended the hill, like madmen running a race, he falls. They laugh and pick him up again. His face is bleeding and covered with dust, but he cannot touch it. Thereupon they laugh again. They bring him into the village, and all the village runs to look. They take him past the mill and up to the prison. All the village sees the prison gate open in the darkness of the night and swallow him like this. He opened his mouth as wide as he could and shut it with a sounding snap of his teeth. Observant of his unwillingness to mar the effect by opening it again, Defarge said, "Go on, Jacques." All the village pursued the mender of roads on tiptoe and in a low voice, withdraws. All the village whispers by the fountain. All the village sleeps. All the village dreams of that unhappy one within the lock and bars of the prison on the crag, and never to come out of it, except to perish in the morning with my tools upon my shoulder, eating my morsel of black bread as I go. I make a circuit by the prison on my way to my work. There I see him high up, behind the bars of a lofty iron cage, bloody and dusty as last night looking through. He has no hand free to wave to me. I dare not call to him. He regards me like a dead man. Defarge and the three glanced darkly at one another. The looks of all of them were dark, repressed, and revengeful as they listened to the countryman's story. The manner of all of them, well, it was secret, was authoritative too. They had the air of a rough tribunal, Jacques 1 and Jacques 2, sitting on the old pallet bed, each with his chin resting on his hand, and his eyes intent on the road mender, Jacques 3 equally intent, on one knee behind him, and his agitated hand always gliding over the network of fine nerves about his mouth and nose, Defarge standing between them, and the narrator, whom he had stationed in the light of the window, by turns looking from him to them, from them to him. "Go on, Jacques," said Defarge. "He remains up there in his iron cage some days. The village looks at him by stealth, for it is afraid, but it always looks up from a distance at the prison on the crag, and in the evening, when the work of the day is achieved, it assembles to gossip at the fountain. All faces are turned toward the prison. Formerly they were turned toward the posting-house. Now they are turned toward the prison. They whisper at the fountain that although condemned to death, he will not be executed. They say that petitions have been presented in Paris, showing that he was enraged and made mad by the death of his child. They say that a petition has been presented to the king himself. What do I know? It is possible, perhaps yes, perhaps no." "Listen then, Jacques," number 1 of that name sternly imposed. "Know that a petition was presented to the king, Queen. All here, yourself excepted, saw the king take it, in his carriage in the street, sitting beside the Queen. It is Defarge whom you see here, who, at the hazard of his life, darted out before the horses with the petition in his hand." "And once again, listen, Jacques," said the kneeling number 3, his fingers ever wandering over and over those fine nerves, with a strikingly greedy air, as if he hungered for something that was neither food nor drink. The guard, horse and foot, surrounded the petitioner, and struck him blows. "You hear?" "I hear, messieurs." "Go on, then," said Defarge. "Again, on the other hand, they whisper at the fountain," resumed the countryman, "that he is brought down into our country to be executed on the spot, and that he will very certainly be executed. They even whisper that because he has slain Monseigneur, and because Monseigneur was the father of his tenants, serfs, what you will, he will be executed as a parricide. The old man says that one old man said at the fountain that his right hand, armed with the knife, will be burnt off before his face, that into wounds which will be made in his arms, his breasts, and his legs there will be poured boiling oil, melted lead, hot resin, wax, and sulphur. Finally, that he will be torn limb from limb by 4 strong horses. The old man says all this was actually done to a prisoner who made an attempt on the life of the last king, Louis XV. But how do I know if he lies? I am not a scholar. Listen once again, then, Jacques, said the man with the restless hand and the craving air. The name of that prisoner was Dickens, and it was all done in open day, in the open streets of the city of Paris, and nothing was more noticed in the vast concourse that saw it done than the cruel ladies of quality and fashion, who were full of eager attention to the last, Jacques, prolonged until nightfall, when he had lost 2 legs and an arm and still breathed. And it was done. Why, how old are you? 35, said the mender of roads, who looked 60. It was done when you were more than 10 years old. You might have seen it. Enough, said Defarge, with grim impatience. Long live the devil. Go on. Well, some whisper this, some whisper that. They speak of nothing else. Even the fountain appears to fall to that tune. At length, on Sunday night, when all the village is asleep, come soldiers winding down from the prison, and their guns ring on the stones of the little street. Workmen dig, workmen hammer, soldiers laugh and sing in the morning. By the fountain there is raised a gallows 40 feet high, poisoning the water. The mender of roads looked through rather than at the low ceiling, and pointed as if he saw the gallows somewhere in the sky. All work is stopped. All assemble there. Nobody leads the cows out. The cows are there with the rest. At midday, the roll of drums. Soldiers have marched into the prison in the night, and he is in the midst of many soldiers. He is bound as before, and in his mouth there is a gag tied so with a tight string, making him look almost as if he laughed. He suggested it by creasing his face with his 2 thumbs. From the corners of his mouth to his ears, on the top of the gallows is fixed a knife, blade upwards, with its point in the air. He is hanged there 40 feet high, and is left hanging, poisoning the water. They looked at one another, as he used his blue cap to wipe his face, on which the perspiration had started afresh while he recalled the spectacle. It is frightful, messieurs. How can the women and children draw water? Who can gossip in the evening under that shadow? Under it, have I said, when I left the village Monday evening as the sun was going to bed, and looked back from the hill, the shadow struck across the church, across the mill, across the prison, seemed to strike across the earth, messieurs, to where the sky rests upon it. The hungry man gnawed one of his fingers as he looked at the other 3, and his finger quivered with the craving that was on him. That's all, messieurs. I left at sunset, as I had been warned to do, and I walked on that night, and half next day, until I met, as I was warned I should, this comrade. With him I came on, now riding and now walking, through the rest of yesterday, and through last night, and here you see me. After a gloomy silence, the first Jacques said, Good! You have acted and recounted faithfully. Will you wait for us a little outside the door? Very willingly, said the mender of roads, whom Defarge escorted to the top of the stairs, and leaving, seated there, returned. The 3 had risen, and their heads were together when he came back to the garret. How say you, Jacques? Demanded number 1. To be registered as doomed to destruction, returned Defarge. Magnificent! Croaked the man with the craving. The chateau and all the race? Inquired the first. The chateau and all the race, returned Defarge. Extermination. The hungry man repeated, in a rapturous croak, Magnificent! And began gnawing another finger. Are you sure, asked Jacques too of Defarge, that no embarrassment can arise from our manner of keeping the register? Without doubt it is safe, for no one beyond ourselves can decipher it. But shall we always be able to decipher it? Or ought I to say, will she? Jacques, returned Defarge, drawing himself up, if Madame, my wife, undertook to keep the register in her memory alone, she would not lose a word of it, not a syllable of it. Knitted in her own stitches, in her own syllables, it will always be as plain to her as the sun. Confide in Madame Defarge. It would be easier for the weakest poltroon that lives to erase himself from existence than to erase one letter